Good evening, everyone from around the world. I am Susan Lauer, the administrator of the Maharishi Vastu Office for North America. We're very pleased to have you join us this evening. It's evening our time anyway. And today's webinar will focus on how to find an ideal site in either a city, suburb, or more rural area for building your Maharishi Vastu home. Jon Lipman, our National Vastu Director for North America and the Caribbean, will be joined by Ognjen Djurovic, who is a recent graduate of the Vastu Architects training course and the Director of Architecture for the firm CEP in Belgrade, Serbia. As Ognjen is living in Serbia, his presentation tonight will be a recording of the talk he gave on last Tuesday's event. Ognjen will focus on the details of locating a site in an urban environment and will also give us a fascinating overview of some of the major cities around the world from the perspective of their site, according to Maharishi Vastu Architecture. Jon will be answering questions at the end of Ognjen's presentation, but then we'll also be giving some points of his own at the beginning. So Jon, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you, Susan. We'll cover a few very elementary points that are nonetheless very helpful when we think about building Maharishi Vastu House. First of all, where do you want to live? What area around the city? How much land will you need? And we can help you with that, of course. And think about the size of the footprint of the house that you'll be building based upon your desires and your mortgage capability. Or just make a list of the rooms you have in the house, and then we can help you to figure out what that turns into. Know when you build Maharishi Vastu that there will be a fence around the house. This is a very important and valuable aspect of natural law-based architecture. And so there will need to be space for the square or rectangular fenced yard around the house. It can be quite close to the house, but it will take some additional space. If the house is in a homeowners association, then you'll want to get a hold of the association's regulations to verify that it permits you to have a fence, all the way around the house, including on the front side, because some homeowners associations in the US do not permit this. Next, if the front property line is rotated off of the cardinal directions, does not face due north or east or even west, then you or we or south, then you or we will have to make sure that you will be permitted to build a house that is aligned with due east, due north, relative to the street. Sometimes houses are required to be within a few degrees of parallel to the street. Know whether you expect to have a garage and how many car stalls. Once you know these things, we can be very helpful with you to help you identify what lot will be suitable for your aspirations. East facing lots are the most ideal. They're the most nourishing for you. North facing lots are also ideal, but we can work with many other orientations of lots, even though these are the best. If there are hills to the east of the lot that are higher than the lot, then that lot might not work because the retarding influence of hills to the east on sunrise is a loss to the quality of life lived in that house. So when you visit a lot, bring a compass or the compass app on a smartphone to check which way is east and then see whether there are hills there. Similarly, if the nearest water body is close and to the south or the west, that could be an issue. And very importantly, when you visit the land, how do you feel to be there? You might want to meditate if you practice TM on the land and see what your experience is there. When you go to the lot, also keep an eye out for nearby cell phone towers, high tension lines, and electrical substations. If there are any in the vicinity of the lot, we can show you how to have them evaluated. Now, do not purchase a lot immediately. When you have one in mind, be in touch with us at info@maharishi.vastu.org. info@maharishi.vastu.org. We'll arrange to evaluate the site for you remotely for these various Vastu considerations and others. We don't need to visit you, so it's very economical. And only after we've done a site evaluation for you should you make arrangements to purchase the lot. The practice of Maharishi Vastu is unique in the world. It is distinct from other practices of Vastu. And so if you are reading texts from other traditions, you may find one of an infinite number of different sets of guidelines for how to pick a lot, but those will only confuse you, because Maharishi evaluated the 6 major lineages of Vastu that have survived the millennia in India, and working with all 6 of them and with the Vedic literature, the ancient Vedic texts, and his own status as a great seer, a Maharishi, over a 20-year period, he worked to ensure that he was identifying a practice of Vastu that was completely authentic to the Vedic tradition and therefore completely effective. And at the same time, it is very simple to follow, and we will help you through a very simple procedure to evaluate your lot and build your home. And now I will turn to Ognjen for his presentation.
Hello to the audience. Hello to you, John and Susan. I'm very glad that you asked me to participate in these webinars. I prepared a little short presentation about some issues regarding the picking or choosing the proper Maharishi site, and I explored it in the case of my hometown Belgrade in Serbia. So I can start presentation now if it is okay. Well, the title of this presentation is How to Find an Ideal Site for Your Maharishi Vastu Home, Belgrade, Serbia, as a case study. This is part of the Maharishi Vastu webinars conducted by Jon Lipman and Susan Lawyer. So at the very beginning of choosing the proper Vastu site, we have to, on the right side, you see the 5 or 6 most important topics: auspicious shape of the plot, slope, entrance, position of the water, auspicious sunrise, and auspicious environment. So you can say that because this is the first thing that we have to choose wisely, it is probably the most important thing in the whole Vastu design sequence. I will show you pictures from various towns, international and cities, but I would like to specifically point city matrix problems. We are living in the existing cities right now, and they are not built according to Vastu. And I will try to discuss here what is proper city matrix and how it will affect the overall life of the house, city, and its inhabitants. When checking all various city plans all over the world, we see that most of them, on the right side, you have those cities, New York, Toronto, Berlin. Most of them are, let's say, organically started their life, and they change during the time, receiving influences from various reasons, either topographical, either, I don't know, sociological, or economical. So we can find, we see that there is no distinguished, let's say, city planning protocol that we could use or that we can try to see in these existing cities. When we are speaking about Vastu and the city matrix within, we know that Vastu, it is very important, or let's say one of the key and the most important features of the Vastu building and design is the proper orientation to the cardinal directions. On the left side, you see a lot of various towns that don't have proper orientation. They have round shape orientation, going this way, that way. Some of them, probably mostly new built cities in, I don't know, a couple of 100 years ago, started their main development in last 200 years ago. They might have some kind of proper orientation. There is this guy, Jeffrey Boeing, on the right side. He actually built some kind of software that would explore and assess the city network of each particular town. And you can see there that there are various examples. On the top of the page, you see there are some cities like Chicago, Miami, Minneapolis, Vancouver, etc., that are mainly properly oriented. And on the bottom line, you see mostly old towns that are very specifically connected to the specific topographic situation where they began. So this, I can read a few if you don't see it. Seoul, Oslo, Moscow, Istanbul. So with this software, we could probably assess if the existing town is, let's say, suitable for further Vastu development, or we can assess how the new Vastu development, which should be, according to the Vastu principles, which should be oriented towards the cardinal direction, what would be the problems when we try to implement new Vastu development into the existing town and city metrics. So now I will try to assess, to see how the buildings within the city could be arranged and what the repercussions, what is the story behind that. First, I have these examples. I check various royal codes in Europe to see what is their orientation. You see that most of them are not properly oriented, not according to the cardinal direction. On the left, you see Buckingham Palace. It has somehow, although not, it is not Vastu at all, but it has somehow entrance from the north, east, which is somehow beneficial. It's not a proper Vastu, but it is somehow beneficial. On the right-hand side and in the middle, you see Versailles and St. Petersburg. And you know all the story, history about those royal houses, how they ended. They didn't end very nice. They have this orientation towards the southeast, which is Agni, which is with a lot of Agni influence. So it means that too much Agni it's not supportive to the life of the building and even more to the whole country. So these royal courts on the right-hand side didn't have a nice history. When we are analyzing, I named this slide Three Powerful Nations. We see on the left-hand side, we can see this is Washington, D.C. Wow, you see the clear, proper, Vastu-oriented houses according to the cardinal directions. It is not complete Vastu, but when we are assessing just this one small piece, like orientation toward directions, we can see that Washington, D.C. is pretty okay. And maybe it is not coincidence that proper Vastu orientation might lead to the prosperity of the country. On the right-hand side, we see above, we see the Great Britain. Great Britain is also a very interesting country. I mean, interesting, but a huge and powerful nations, you know, like territorially small, living, they all live in one island, but actually their influence to the world is enormous. They said once, there is this say in the 19th century, like the sun never sets in British Empire. It was so huge. And when we check all those main buildings that are generating power within, we see all these administrative buildings like Houses of Parliament and as the main building in the Great Britain, they're properly oriented. What's more, there is the Thames River right there on the east. It is like by the book, by the Vastu book, put the water or have the house oriented towards the east water and have it oriented according to the cardinal elections. So this situation over there in London, Houses of Parliament and other administrative facilities looks pretty nice. Maybe that is some kind of reason for this huge influence and huge prosperous development of the Great Britain. On the left-hand side, let me go back just once more. In this lens, you see the very White House. It is Pennsylvania Avenue on the north, so the proper address is Pennsylvania Avenue, meaning that this house over here has a north entrance. When you open any Vastu book, you will see that this is one of the most auspicious entrances to the building. And it is. You know that in the last century, at least, the United States of America is let's say, the world leader. When we are checking other buildings around the world, we can check also on these Indian temples. I mean, Vastu as Shastra or as a science originated from there. And you can see that almost all important buildings in India are oriented towards the cardinal directions. Those three temples are very important temples for them. Those are Jyotirlinga temples, Rameshwara on the south, Somanath on the west, Krishna's temple, and the Kedarnath up there in the Himalayas. You see they're all properly oriented. There is a little twist over here because you see the angle of their orientation is a little bit off of the precise cardinal directions, but that is also some spice that they would add to this general principle of orientation. I would not comment about what is this offset means, or here we also see the Kedarnath temple that has a south entrance, it's not east entrance as Somanath is, as Rameshwara is. So there are also some kind of variations there in the science of Vastu Shastra. When we are checking Christian churches, on the right side we have Paris, we have Milan, and Rome over here. Generally, one might say that the proper orientation of the Christian churches are with the entrance from the west. And that's almost the rule, like in Milan Cathedral. You have to enter the cathedral from the west side, and the deity, the Jesus, is on the east side. So when you are entering, you're actually seeing God or his avatar Jesus in the east. And it is generally rule. But look at this. On the left-hand side, we see the Rome. Wow, the most important Christian church in the world, or let's say the most important, have actually entrance from the east. And it is, according to Vastu Shastra, they say it gives huge fame, blessing, prosperity, and influence. And it is so. When we are checking today's new government buildings in Europe, you can read the whole history about what's going on there. We see on the left-hand side, we see Parliament in Strasbourg built in 1999. It is close to the river. River is from the east side, but majority of the building, a huge portion of the building is actually put on this very east, actually closing it. And the entrance from to this building is from the northwest, somehow off axis, and it doesn't sound quite right, although this water element over here is nice. The other European Parliament, Brussels, built in 1993, it has northwest entrance. It is also not so good. So maybe you can see the history of Europe is a little bit changing with these new parliament buildings, this one over here and this one over here, because originally, see this square building over here, originally whole concept of Europe was developed in this square building. It is not in line, it's not open to the cardinal directions, but it is in the 45 degrees. But there is also in the Vastu Shastra some books, it is allowed. It is very specific for some buildings, for some temples, but it is recognized that it has some kind of power. So we could say, while the European government was here, it was a good, prosperous time. And then when the whole organization started to rise, the European Parliament, European Council, everything, there are some problems and issues, today Brexit, tomorrow who knows what is going on. I see now the COVID. I don't want to go into the politics. On the right-hand side, you see the new German chancellery. Reichstag is over here, and the German chancellery, Germans, I don't know, intuitively, they built a space, area, headquarters for their chancellor oriented strictly towards east. Well, we'll see if that will bring luck to the nation. New players in the world. You see the Indian parliament, a huge country with a huge potential, rising like crazy these days. Their parliament is of the round shape. Russia, they have this is not a parliament, this is Kremlin, but it has a triangular shape. Let's see what's going on with them, because those are not the figures, the forms that are recognized in Vastu Shastra as a beneficial. They have their own meaning and they have their own potential, but they're not recommended for the, what to say, Manushalaya, for the living on, for ruling on the earth. In Belgrade, I will now go to Belgrade to see what are the problems for finding a proper Vastu site in the Belgrade. Generally, when we see the Belgrade over here, we could say, okay, in macro topography, this is pretty nice. From the north, if the main town capital of Belgrade is here, from the north you have this flat valley, so no, let's say no obstruction, and from the south side there are these mountains. So you would say overall slope goes from the south to the north. That should be beneficial, right? This is the position of the Belgrade right now. But what is important, I here put some slides which are probably off topic. The first Neolithic settlement 5,000 years BC was actually here. So at that time, the most interesting for those people was this area here. So they have this clean east river, east water, and they have this back from the west with the hills. And that was their natural position. Here with all these complicated rivers and etc., we'll see what's going on. This Fincha culture is very interesting because 5,000 years ago they even have their own alphabet. They were burying their dead in this position. Look at this culture, etc. So it is interesting for the people who want to explore this a little bit. So when we check this is a Belgrade, this is a city matrix of the Belgrade, this is the old part of the town, this is new part, going across Danube River, this huge over here is Danube River, going to the east, it's fine, that all looks nice. But what is the problem? You know, this Belgrade over here at the confluence of Danube and Sava was actually, first was built like a fortress, military fortress. It was the northern, let's say, border of the Roman Empire. Above it to the north were just marshes, nothing much interesting, maybe you could say barbarians. So this was some kind of northern border and military fortification. Meaning that the entrance to the town was actually from the southeast. The entrance to the town was actually from the southeast. So although you have this beneficial flow of the river, which are to the north, flowing to the east, and maybe here to the east, you don't have actually a proper entrance because this is dead end and you enter this dead end from the south or from the southeast, and that is actually not so good. And as on those royal course which I mentioned, the southeast direction is not so beneficial because it carries a lot of Agni. Agni is fire, wars, and you know in the history of Belgrade every 50 years somebody get an idea that Belgrade should be bombed. So we have a lot of wars in the Belgrade history. And this is this Agni coming to the town, feeding a lot of Agni inside. I tried to find a precise location here. I put some simulation how we could do it. So this is Belgrade, and I tried to rule out the slopes which are not beneficial, slopes which are towards the west or towards the south. So this one here is towards the south, this one is towards the west. So all those black areas we have to rule out because they are not proper for the Vastu settlement. When we add more to that, applying next rule is water bodies should be to the north and to the east. Maybe this is wrong. So this whole area is ruled out, this area is ruled out, this area is ruled out, because if you live here, you have water from the south and it is not good. So we are also ruling out these huge portions here. When we add man-made influences like cemeteries, I don't know, factories, I don't know, garbage collector, we see that from all this lovely Belgrade over here, that there is not much left. So what we're gonna do there? It's a huge problem. And finally, when we apply beneficial urban matrix, that means the urban matrix which is oriented toward cardinal directions. In Belgrade, there are only just a few these green areas. We see that if you want to build right now, Vastu building, it could be here, which is not influenced by these black areas, and which is in the proper cardinal orientation. City matrix is in the proper cardinal orientation. It is not much left there. So what should we do? Just a small note on the Vastu Belgrade Transcendental Meditation Program. It is interesting that over here we have this recently built Vastu house. It is in proper use, you can see. So it is a proper location, water to the east, no influences whatsoever. The other thing is Maharishi Mali Mokri Loop, Vastu Development. This is plot that was bought by organization. Actually, the word is already saying that Maharishi personally picked this location as very beneficial. So it is now in the possession of the organizations, and there should be the Vastu development over there. Here is our TM center of Serbia right there, which is pretty fine. And here is Hotel Yugoslavia. It is also interesting, but it is just a small talk, history small talk. You know, when Maharishi was first time in, or I mean, the only time was in Serbia, it was in 81st or something like that. He was actually here in Hotel Yugoslavia. You see, they have almost cardinal orientation, east, water from the east. So it is somehow beneficial. So Maharishi either knew it or sensed it in some way. This is the MML Vastu development, which I mentioned previously, the plot that should be developed in the Belgrade. And there is this problem. When you have a Vastu buildings which are cardinally oriented, you know, north, east, etc., they must be like this. And if you have a city matrix that is going diagonally or in some other directions, it is always the problem. And you can put a building like this here, you can, but it is not nice for the neighborhood, which is already built neighborhood with the houses which are along the street. So this is one solution which is good, Vastu-wise, it is very good. But generally, such an individual site, transforming them into Vastu housing, it is always a problem. So if I want to say, as a conclusion of this small assessment of Belgrade situation, in Belgrade, there are limited ideal locations for Maharishi Vastu project. Topographic features, which are very specific, primarily hills and water bodies, restrict locations for Maharishi Vastu development. So it is not easy to implement it. Urban matrix also is going all the directions, you know, from diagonally, is also not suitable for Vastu implementation. And even with the total reconstruction of the city, it would not be possible to establish an ideal Vastu organization of it. Why is that? You all know this sketch over here developed by the organization. It is the scheme of the total reconstruction of the cities. You can see here is the city center, which is non-Vastu. And if you eventually build Vastu houses all around and they somehow later reconstruct this city center itself, and the whole town becomes Vastu town, properly oriented. And here they're also implementing some other topics like garden cities. But in the meantime, what should we do? It is a long-term process and it's a very complicated process. So what I see right now in Belgrade, that the Vastu development cannot be easily implemented on the plot by plot, because you see this in the previous slides with Christian Schweizer's design. It is somehow not compatible with the existing urban. So the proper way to do Vastu is actually by building neighborhood by neighborhood. So we have one larger piece of land and we create a neighborhood which is Vastu. Outside, let's see what's going on. So neighborhood by neighborhood, neighborhood by neighborhood. In that way, we might softly reconstruct existing cities. Those are those two concepts. When you have a major master network grid, which is in the cardinal directions in Beijing, this is what is taught in architectural schools, urban schools in everywhere. So they have this master network like this, and within those blocks, they have freestyle streets and have completely not so regulated housing within. So in the Beijing, for example, you can easily just pick one neighborhood and do it neighborhood by neighborhood. You will preserve this main city matrix and you will get all those Vastu neighborhoods fit properly in the place. In the majority of the towns which do not have this orthogonal master city network, usually it goes like this. We have to do the other thing. Within the major streets, we should find the spots and develop whole neighborhoods and preserve for the time now master road network. I call it master road network because those are very, very expensive to build. They carry with themselves all kinds of infrastructure, building systems, sewage, and it is not easy to just erase this and then put another one orthogonal. So the proper way, which I found it right now in our solution in this year, today, or in the recent future, maybe this could be the proper way. So develop neighborhood by neighborhood And in that way, the inhabitants will enjoy benefits of the Vastu living, and the overall master city network will remain like it, as it is until the time for the major reconstruction, where all those streets should be properly oriented. So only then we can say that the whole town is a coherent structure which with the full energy of Vastu. So advice because of this, selection of the site is very important. If anybody wants to build a Vastu house, please contact Vastu, your designer, Maharishi Vastu Architect, at the very beginning, because you see in picking the site, there are a lot of issues there that when you have a site, and if it is not Vastu, there is no way you can turn it into Vastu if the site is wrong, if the orientation is wrong, if the slopes are wrong, if the water bodies are wrong. And so the involvement of a Vastu architect from the day one, it is very, very important. Later on, when you pick a correct Vastu site, then it is, let's say, straightforward process. You go with your architect, you do it whatever you like. A building architect will guide you and make finally building and a house that will be according to the Vastu, but you will not notice that much later on. And this is just for the time being. Until today, the best remedy against COVID business is made by architect, and it's called your home. Your home is your fortress. Home is the best remedy for everything. And if you have a proper home, Vastu home, you will have a protection of the natural law. John, thank you.
That was terrific that we got to hear from Ognjen, who is so experienced. I think at this point, Susan has some questions that she would like to ask.
Let's see if I've got some. One man is wondering if there is a formula of some particular form for analyzing the influence of multiple water bodies, including how far away, what their size is, and what distance or what orientation they have.
In general terms, we are balancing the distance of the water from the house and the direction of the water to the house. It's a balance of those two qualities.
And I'd actually like to add, John, I thought this is one of the reasons that we have individual site evaluations, because it's within the context of a specific evaluation that all the factors are taken into account by the Vastu consultant, and the best answer for that particular specific site is given. So the next question, if you are checking a site for obstruction to the rising sun, could you tell us what is considered an obstruction and what is not? Are trees a consideration, or other buildings?
Trees and other buildings have a very minimal effect of reducing the nourishing influence of the rising sun, and so we're not really concerned about them. It is hills, it is solid earth that we avoid.
Thank you. This person has encountered several lots that they've been looking at, and these are probably pieces of better sized land that have different slopes at different points on the lot. Sometimes they slope downward to the east on one side, but then also they have a slight downward southern slope on the southern side. Are these varied slopes considered acceptable?
They can be. They certainly can be. We have to take a look at it. It sounds like you can create a nice level Vastu on the lot. And so I would be quite optimistic. We'd take a quick look at it online to know for sure.
Okay, here's another one that has to do with slope, although right around the house. It's common practice in construction to bring in substantial amounts of dirt in order to raise the house higher than the surrounding land. This creates new slopes that are not present before the land is developed. How should this situation be addressed? And I think he's saying, do we allow them to build up a site on an existing slope that might be very auspicious or very favorable because that's the common practice? Or do we make sure that that does not happen, particularly inside the Vastu fence?
We can alter grade, and we also can, if we want, which is ideal, there to be no void under the house. And so we're bringing in fill and compacting it, although typically when we do that, we bring in rock, stone to compact rather than dirt under a building. And all of that is fine.
I think also, John, he may be referring, in addition to what you just said, he may be referring to the practice of sloping the land away from the house to avoid water going down, you know, as the earth begins to settle. And when they do that, they often do that on all sides.
Good point. Yes, we have some very well-working ideas for what to do on the south and west side of the house that we would go over with you or your contractor or your civil engineer to ensure that you do not have a problem with water draining towards the house.
Good. I think that takes care of it. If there is a seasonal creek or ditch, which often happens in areas like Texas and other areas where they get a lot of rain quickly, and then that water goes away, but those ditches or small creeks tend to be in not the right locations. Is that acceptable?
Yes, it is. Yes, it certainly is.
Oh, and in your talk, did you mention at the beginning, did you mention to people about how to use their smartphones for finding the cardinal directions?
I don't think I did. Thanks for mentioning it. There are two ways to find out what the orientation of a lot is and what direction a house would have to face before we work with a surveyor or do a wonderful ancient system of Vedic surveying, which we can do ourselves. But immediately, option number one is to go to the site and bring a smartphone and open it up and turn on the compass function and just make sure that the compass function is set to true cardinal directions and not to the magnetic directions, because depending on where you are, those can be either very close or very far off. And then lay it down on the site away from metal and see what the orientation is. The second option is to look on your phone or on a laptop on either Google Earth or Google Maps or Yahoo Maps or other similar mapping programs, and to type in the address of the site and then zoom in, because those three programs that I mentioned always open and zoom in with due east to the right and due north to the top.
Excellent. And I would also add, as we know how to make sure the compass function on an iPhone or an iPad is set to true north, if anyone knows how that same function is activated on a regular smartphone, and a non-iPhone, we would be happy to have that information. Next question. How can one build to cardinal direction on a plot that's not aligned properly?
Well, one sees whether one can fit a properly oriented square or rectangular Vastu enclosure within the lot. And that is large enough to be able to fit one's house into it. And if one can, then it may be able to proceed. If as I mentioned earlier, if the street is too many degrees of angle off of the cardinal directions, then even if you can fit the house and the Vastu fence on the property properly oriented, it may look peculiar. If it's a small lot, if the house will be well rotated off of the street, even if it fits, it may not look good. So there are some tips.
Thank you. This person writes, does Vastu require that the lot have a slightly longer orientation in the north-south direction instead of the east-west direction?
No, it does not require this.
Okay. If I have a realtor helping me to find a lot, what information should I give them?
Tell them that you ideally would like a lot that faces east, alternately north. And we can certainly manage to get an east-facing house on a south-facing lot. You have a side entrance, but by far the ideal is due east or due north. So those are the starting points. And if the lot is sufficiently oversized beyond the footprint of the house and the Vastu fence, then if the lot is somewhat rotated off of these directions, then it's also suitable. And as I mentioned earlier, at some point early on, if you'll want, or your real estate agent will want to determine whether there are homeowners association rules or zoning rules that prohibit having a fence on the front of the house. So that should get an agent started. Also, we've talked about slope, something level, something without a hill to the east of it. And with that, they can come pretty close.
And the second half of this question from the same person, is it best to use a realtor, or are there other ways to find land lots that you could suggest?
In some cases, builders own lots and they own them and want to build on them. And so it may be that if you contact some of the home builders in the area who build in the area you want to live, lo and behold, they'll have lots available for you that are not listed. So there's another handy way to find lots.
And this came in through the Q&As. I answered most of the questions, but this person asked, isn't the Manu Shalaya Chandrika an authoritative source for Vastu? If it conflicts with Maharishi Vastu, which one should we follow?
Manushalaya Chandrika is a family text associated with Kerala, and we have elevated it to close to the standard of Ved, but it is not so old. And the great majority of it is very close to Maharishi Vastu, but not all of it.
And maybe, John, this would be a good time to talk, just to mention that when examining the different texts and the things that were brought to him by the Stapati families that Maharishi felt were still honoring the fullness of the tradition of Vastu, what it was that, how he compiled all of those together into one cohesive and universal whole.
Well, you said it very well, Susan. There isn't much for me to add, except that, as I mentioned earlier, he met with the representatives of the 6 distinguished families of Stapatis, of Vedic architects from ancient lineages across India, and went over the Vedic texts with each of them and examined deeply in which way each family's practice did express the Vedic texts and did not. And through this 20-year process, he was able, relying on his highly refined vision as a seer and with constant reference to the Vedic literature, to identify what are the most authentic and therefore the most effective elements of the holistic system, the integrated system of Vastu, and that we call Maharishi Vastu in this generation.
And I also wanted to add, John, a point that you've always mentioned in the past, and that is that if someone who is very eager to find this knowledge and they have a text such as this, but they're relying on the translation of the text, not its original, but whoever the translator was, their interpretation of that text.
That's a very good point. Not only might interpretation be wrong, but one of the two major Vedic texts on the subject is available in an earlier translation and a slightly later translation by the same author. And the earlier one is in paperback in a single volume, and the later one is 2 volumes hardbound and therefore much more expensive. And so most people buy the earlier paperback version, and it has some directions incorrectly translated. So it's very tricky. It really is too challenging to try to figure it out from the Vedic texts. This is also because this is a technical science, and there are terms and practices described in the texts which can be only understood with reference to the practice of architecture. And that requires a proper technical translation of a word. So it's a tricky business, and we are very grateful that Maharishi spearheaded a process for 2 decades to make it really usable and to remove the confusion from it.
Thank you, John. I think that is a really good point to make. One more question came in through our Q&A. How important is the view with regard to Vastu? That is to say, is it important that there be a good view from the site?
We very much encourage a good view. Maharishi even said that when you live in a house, you should feel as though you're living in a garden surrounded by the beauties of nature. And recent neurophysiological research has verified such things as patients in hospital rooms with a beautiful view of nature recuperate more quickly than patients who do not have that. And so common sense, the state of the art in medical science, and ancient Vastu guidance all encourage us to build where or to create on our site the beauties of nature.
Yes, and I will just say that it isn't necessary that, as John just said, you can create a view outside your house as long as you've got a little bit of space that will make it beautiful. That should not discourage someone from looking in a neighborhood where there are other houses close by or something like that. But you want it to be a pleasant environment, a peaceful environment, and one that you will feel comfortable in. But in terms of a view, that's something you can create with your own garden and yard. Okay, I think that's the end of our questions. So everybody, thank you for being so very patient with us tonight. And if more questions come to your mind, then you can always email us through the Contact Us form on our website, which is www.maharishivastu.org. Good night, everyone, and have a pleasant evening.